and welcome to Legal Affairs. My name is Diamond Liddy, and I'm the public defender of the 19th Judicial Circuit. We are going to be talking about a latest and greatest program, if you will, or memo of understanding or whatever that has been promulgated in our circuit for our children. But we've got a lot of other things hot off the press to talk about regarding juveniles and juvenile law, and kind of a juvenile law update, if you will. So with us is Armand Murach. Good morning, Armand.
Good morning, Diamond.
And I have to ask this question, even though I know the answer. And you work where and for how long?
I work in the public defender's office in the 19th Circuit for you, and I've worked there for the past 4.5 years.
Okay. And Armand, your title, you are a supervisor of all the juvenile attorneys in the entire judicial circuit, are you not?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, where you went to law school, what your interests were, those kinds of things.
Well, I went to law school at Nova Southeastern University down in Fort Lauderdale. When I started studying there, I knew I wanted to be a trial lawyer. So I did everything under the sun, read every book, watched everything I could go to court and watch trials, to the point that I actually had attorneys talk to me after I graduated, thinking that I graduated years before, because they would always see me in court. So I sort of knew what I wanted to do.
Right.
And then luck would have me find my way to your office, and I've been doing the job that I've loved doing for the past 4.5 years.
Oh, no, that's great. And you do it great, by the way. I can say that publicly.
Thank you.
Okay. But as part of your job duties with our office, you are part of many juvenile committees, councils, things of that nature. Although we have had people that have been involved in what's called the Executive Roundtable of St. Lucie County, we've done bits and pieces of that. But I think before we get to the meat of the matter, if you will, tell me what is the Executive Roundtable and who's involved in it and what it does.
Well, the Executive Roundtable, and if you're talking about the St. Lucie Executive Roundtable, it's involving community activists, partners, and everything along those lines to help the community get basically better itself.
Right.
So a lot of times there's subgroups that involve volunteers that work with children to try to better the community, better the city of Fort Pierce, where there's gang involvement, try to get kids out of gang involvement.
Right, right.
Look at kids' mental health issues, look at school board issues, what's going on in the schools, and sort of try to build the community from the ground up, basically from a very young age with kids.
And that has been, it's statutorily mandated, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, and that's, I know we're part of that, but it's been around for many years, pretty much, hasn't it?
Yes. The advisory board basically became something that the Department of Juvenile Justice created, I believe, about, don't quote me on this, but I would say about 10 years or so.
Right, right.
And then they started meeting to talk about local issues.
Right.
So the statute then delved into making it more localized so that each circuit could work on their special issues, because, I mean, from our state is so diverse, Orlando to Jacksonville to Miami to West Palm to the Treasure Coast, every area is completely different.
Right. But it primarily focuses, does it not, on kids, on juveniles?
It does.
Okay. So at this table, there was seen a need to create and get everybody engaged in what's called a civil citation program, were they not? Okay.
Yes.
Explain, for those who aren't involved in the legal system, and fortunately most people aren't, what's the standard course if a child gets in trouble, commits a crime? give us that path of what happens. They get, arrested, detained, whatever, and go on. And then let's talk about the, kind of compare and contrast the civil citation program. So start with just your garden variety juvenile, who is someone under the age of 18, obviously, gets arrested for petty theft. What happens?
So taking civil citation out of the equation,
Right.
just the standard procedure, what would happen? A child would similarly be arrested as any adult would be. But that's where it sort of ends there in terms of the similarities between a child and an adult. After a child is picked up, they're taken to what's called a juvenile assessment center, which is basically run by the Department of Juvenile Justice. They go through a process of looking through their history, seeing if they've had any diversions or any type of other contacts with the justice system.
Right.
And then they go through a detention risk assessment instrument, or as we call it, short, DRE. That DRE is sort of a determination that a court will use within 24 hours to determine whether that child will be released either outright to their parents, whether they'll be placed on home detention, or whether they'll be held in secure detention for a maximum of about 21 to 30 days in the Department of Juvenile Justice.
Okay, now, so that's, the juveniles, do they not get a first appearance hearing just as adults do, correct?
Yes, we just don't call it a first appearance hearing.
Right.
We call it a detention hearing.
Okay, and which basically, I guess in a nutshell, is they're brought before the court, before the judge, and they're advised of what they're accused of, etc. Okay, so and then they go to the detention center. Are there bonds or there aren't for? Explain the difference between that.
Well, that's a major difference. Obviously, most kids don't have jobs or don't
Right.
have money that they can
Right.
pay for a bond.
Right.
And the juvenile justice system is designed to have the least restrictive means of controlling a child or protecting the community or property.
Right.
So legitimately, when there is a secure detention for 21 days, that's it. It's just 21 days, just to make sure that the state attorney, law enforcement, they finish their investigation and it can move through the juvenile justice system.
Okay.
So in terms of keeping someone locked up, we really don't do that in the juvenile justice system.
Right.
Because that's a form of punishment.
Right.
And in the juvenile justice system, it's more about rehabilitation than punishment.
Right. Okay. And what's in the best interest of the child, sort of.
Of
Okay.
course.
Okay. So that is your garden variety standard. And this could be for a child who has never been in trouble before, who's not truant, who's a good kid, made just a stupid mistake, correct?
That we see a lot of those, unfortunately,
Yeah.
where people don't understand what they did was wrong, or they didn't think it was as bad as the law seems to make it out. And that's
Right.
That's one of the toughest part of our job, is having to explain that to parents who might be confused, angry, upset at this first sort of taste into the justice system.
Okay. So now, pan to civil citation. What is the course? What happens? And we're going to talk, we got to discuss how the civil citation program came to be, too, and we'll do that in a minute. But again, compare and contrast if the civil citation program is utilized.
Okay. So for the civil citation to be utilized, it basically has to be a child that has never been in trouble before, never had any contacts with law enforcement or the juvenile justice system. If they pick up a charge, a lower level charge, sort of a misdemeanor level charge, something that isn't something high level like a felony or anything like that, there's a possibility that law enforcement can do a civil citation or pre-arrest diversion, which means before they are even arrested or anything like that,
Okay.
they'll go through a process of determining if they qualify for civil citation.
Okay. And is that done at the JAC or on the road or what?
It can be done on the road, and
Okay.
they can be given a notice to appear at one of the providers for civil citation. So
Okay.
some law enforcement departments have their own civil citation program, and then there are other providers within the community that are also involved in providing civil citation.
Okay. What law enforcement agencies have it, and what are some of the other providers?
See, there's a long list of them, and I
Oh,
don't
okay.
wanna,
Well, just give us a few. But
the one
Port St.
that is most prevalent that I know of, and I've worked closely with their provider, is the Port St. Lucie Police Department.
Right.
They run their own diversion program. They do a great job, and they really care about trying to get kids services that they need to sort of learn from their mistakes and do better in life.
Okay. Now, this is not, so a child who's arrested for, let's say, a robbery would not qualify for this, or they could qualify for this, or?
Well, sometimes when there's robbery charges, when they're high-level felonies along those lines, they wouldn't qualify based on the
Okay.
statute and based also on our memorandum that we have.
Okay. So and I've got some more questions about that. So, well, let's finish those. So the law enforcement officer does the research on the road or at the JAC and determines this child does qualify. Then what happens?
Then they'll go through, the qualification process requires them to first admit that they did something wrong or admit guilt.
Okay.
That's sort of a sticking point because that's only for diversion programs. So it's not admitting that you did something wrong and then you're going to be taken to court and then, found guilty.
Right.
So
It's not a setup.
it's not a setup. Yes.
Okay.
So parents get involved. They talk to the victim if there is a victim, and then they get notice to appear and they set up an appointment with the diversion program.
Okay.
At that point, they do an assessment to see what type of needs they need. They interview the parents. They talk to the kid. They may need drug intervention or substance abuse
right.
counseling. They need to figure out if there's any money that's owed to a victim. So if you break someone's window on purpose, they figured out that type of amount, and then they set up a payment plan, and then they determine if there's any other services they need. So on top of that, they may have to do also some community service hours. So it's sort of an all-encompassing, holistic approach to try to rehabilitate a child from ever getting put in this situation again.
Okay. Now, does all that happen upon arrest or detention? I mean, what happens? Okay, certainly, let's say the child goes into the Walmart, takes a pack of gum, whatever, sticks it in his pocket, walks out, gets detained, arrested for petty theft. Law enforcement determines the child has no prior record, gets in touch with the parents. The Walmart or whatever can give their consent for a diversion or not. That's easy. But what about if it's the victim you can't get in touch with right then? What happens?
Well, at that point, they still would be referred to diversion.
Okay.
But at the end point, when they do go in for their meeting, if there has been some contact with a victim and they're saying, no, absolutely not, and law enforcement decides not to do diversion, because at the end of the day, it's left into the discretion of law enforcement. So even if the victim says no, law enforcement has the discretion to still possibly put the child into diversion if they want to.
So ultimately, it's their decision, not the victim's, not anybody else's, basically. However, I guess the only have to be no question about it factor that needs to be in there is that the child is willing to go through it and is willing to do whatever it takes,
right,
to complete it. What are some of the sanctions, Armand?
Well, some of the sanctions, like I mentioned, would be community service hours that they would have to do to sort
Right.
of, show that they did something wrong and gives them shows the remorse for what they're doing. Realistically, in terms of sanctions, that's the only real sanction.
Okay.
Because I personally don't consider the therapy that they may receive, mental health counseling, substance abuse counseling to be a sanction, but more so get them on the right track.
Right.
And basically, something the parents missed out on or didn't notice when it was too late to stop it.
Well, what about, let's say a child, one of the things the child obviously needs is mental health counseling or drug. What if they can't afford that?
Well, I know that the services and a lot of the funding for this comes from the states.
Right.
So there is very minimal. There may be some minimal costs, but it's nothing that actually would hinder anyone from really being able to participate in the diversion program.
So even if you're poor, the family is poor, if you're a first-time offender, everybody agrees, whatever, you can partake in this.
Yeah, we're fortunate enough that we have a lot of providers and a lot of people that are involved in the Civil Citation program that they will make it work.
Okay.
They will figure it out to make it work to help a kid avoid getting into future trouble.
Okay, well, let's go back then. So now we've got the differences in regular arrest versus pretrial diversion. How did this pretrial diversion civil citation program that sounds wonderful even happen?
Well, it first happened back in the 90s, where the legislature allowed it to happen. That point, it wasn't statewide because it was basically just left up to whatever areas wanted to do it and had the means and ability to do it.
The whims of the different circuits,
Right. So it wasn't until about 10 years ago that the legislature mandated that every circuit has a juvenile civil citation program.
Right.
So at that point in time, law enforcement was working on developing it, and it was sort of run by the judicial administration because each circuit head judge was supposed to be in charge of it in a sense.
Right.
So then it started promulgating, and more circuits started developing these civil citation programs, and then started seeing that there's benefits to it. Mainly recidivism was going down. Kids were not reoffending, not committing more offenses, and started putting more and more resources into it.
Right. Well, that was my question. Does it work, Armand? I mean, you've obviously been doing this long enough.
Well, I'll say generally a lot of people have skepticism about it because that old adage, spoil the child,
Yeah, they think it's a giveaway program. They think you're not being tough enough.
Yeah. Realistically, the same type of sanctions that you get on the civil citation program are basically what you would have similarly if they went through the juvenile justice system.
Because you're a first time, you're not going to get terrible sanctions.
But I've been lucky enough to go to some conferences in the state that providers from other circuits have talked about how their programs have worked.
Right.
And I've seen some people that have talked about how they were very skeptical, very, very worried about, this is just going to be a slap on the wrist for them and no one's going to learn anything, to determining that they were actually having around 80%, 90% decrease in recidivism.
Wow. Yeah.
So that led them to now start increasing the services. So law enforcement is actually even trying to get more service providers to get better and more advanced services for kids in these other communities that it's working for them.
But we've always been in the lead on services and that, have we not? I mean,
we are. We're ahead of the average on most of the other most of the state as well. We just have some programs have a few years on us.
Right.
We're going to catch up to that. So I guarantee that. But we're along the lines, and the Department of Juvenile Justice has made comments at these meetings of ours that we're really ahead of the game of being prepared and really pushing forward for this memorandum that we've passed.
Well, and again, I cut you off and got on another topic. So the legislature mandated it, that every circuit have one. But you guys had to really, as a subcommittee, I guess, of the executive roundtable, you really had to put pen to paper and promulgate or write this program from scratch, did you not?
Yes. It wasn't easy because this is still basically bleeding edge law that Florida is using.
Right.
And the law is basically changing every year.
Yeah.
So even after
and it's going to change again this year, as we know, right?
That's right. And even though we've reached the conclusion that we have this memorandum, we know we're going to have to change it in the years coming, and looking at how the reporting comes back to see what we can make better, what we can streamline the process and get more kids involved in it.
Right. And the legislature, are they wanting stats? Are they wanting each circuit to report their success and failures?
That's part of the whole thing.
Right.
Part of the statute has that they have to report the demographics of who's being involved in it. The reasons why children will not be aren't offered placement into the program, which is which is really a sticking point right now, because state average has it around 50 to 60%. We're in that average zone.
Right.
But the reporting aspects of how it's being reported, they're still trying to clear that up so that they can get a proper understanding. Everyone agrees that it's way more than 60% because law enforcement's on board with it, providers are on board with it.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense. But that's why we're still on the bleeding edge of trying to figure all that stuff out.
And so you folks got in a room. How many were there of you that wrote this and put this together?
Oh, I would say on the subcommittee, which was almost the entire committee itself, I would say we were around 20, 30 people.
Wow.
That involves most of a representative from each law enforcement agency in the 19th circuits. Imagining 4 counties, that's a lot of police departments, sheriff departments coming together, school boards, providers, mental health professionals, Department of Juvenile Justice, state attorney, myself.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of people that were involved in the process.
Well, and there's competing and not competing interests so much as there's differences in opinions on how you treat these kids. So, obviously the state attorney's position and opinion is not going to be exactly what we're saying, although sometimes obviously it all got worked out, but there's tweaks that had to be done, and I know you stood firm and hard on some of your issues. Thank you, Armand.
Thank you.
But at the end of the day, a proclamation of a diversion program was put in place and written, correct?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and all the players had to sign off on it, correct?
Yes, everyone had to do it so we can have sort of a more uniform system within the 19th Circuit.
Okay, and that again, I think it's important to note this wasn't just for St. Lucie County. This was for Okeechobee, Martin, and Indian River County as well.
Yes, it was.
Correct. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just amazed and so proud of you and the players that you were able, with all of the diverse entities, all of the diverse opinions, the diversity of the counties in our circuit as well, that an agreement was reached.
Well, at the end of the day, I think everyone at the subcommittee meeting, no one was perfectly happy. And then you know that from negotiating skills and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it's kind of like mediations. And
right.
Yeah.
If no one walks out happy, that means you've gotten the best deal that you can at that point in time.
Great. So after the legislative session ends, do you all plan on meeting again to see what changes and see what tweaks you have to do?
Yeah, well, in terms of if there is going to be any changes, yes, but we're sort of now transitioning to phase 2, which is education about the program.
Okay, which means letting people know it exists?
Letting people know it exists, training law enforcement officers about how to talk to victims about it, because people don't know about it. So they may hear civil citation and may think, oh, he's going to have to pay a fee and not have to do anything else.
Right.
Which is not exactly what it's about.
Right.
So it's about teaching all the players that are involved. So victims and educating them about what that is. Law enforcement on how to approach the victims, how to approach the children, how to approach the parents.
Right.
And then also educating the parents about what this means.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine a parent that whose child has never gotten in trouble before having to admit on the spot that they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
And, you know, even though no one may have any contact or involvement in law enforcement or committing crimes, everyone knows you have the right to remain silent.
Right.
So it's sort of counterintuitive to say you're guilty in order to do a civil citation.
Right. But in the end, at the end of the day, you've won.
Yes.
I mean, and I don't mean that in that was not appropriate. But the child wins in the sense of they get, if they complete all the sanctions, they get their charges dropped.
Well, there's no charges in the first place.
I'm sorry, that's right. The charge never gets filed in the first place, and so they can, go on without, a record.
Yep, and that's
which
the
is
goal.
which is huge. And let's talk about that. We're all, believe it or not, I told you before, we're all, it goes so fast. We're almost out of time. We've got a couple minutes, but give us, Armand, briefly, and you're not as old as me, which is a good thing. So, but I know you know the history of juveniles. It was much easier back in the day, wasn't it? I mean, if a juvenile got arrested or detained or even had a juvenile record, it didn't follow them or hurt them or prevent them from getting jobs, getting into the military, all of those things like it does now, correct?
Right. It's interesting to look at it decade by decade.
Oh gosh.
Because just from now and looking at what it is in the 2010s, it's different than it was in the 2000s. Definitely different than in the 90s or in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
And that has it's funny. I would say that as if I were 12 years old back in when I was 12 years old, some of the things I would have done may have gotten me arrested. May have gotten a lot of kids arrested.
Right.
Because no one would know that this is how it works.
Right.
But since society has been changing, we've had these tragedies in school and these sort of red flags that haven't been addressed.
Right.
We're going from a time where in the 1990s and early 2000s, there wasn't a police officer at a school campus.
Oh, no.
Now we're dealing with a police officer at every campus, and for good reason.
Right.
So it's definitely a changing system of how juvenile justice is working. And luckily, the legislature is focusing on that. The state in Tallahassee are working on that. And as you know, the court systems are realizing that the brain of a child is completely different.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank goodness,
Yes.
But we have to make some amends for that because, again, back in the day, in the 90s, the 80s, a lot of crimes, they did not arrest the child. If they did, they were off the record in, I think it was, gosh, when I was back as a prosecutor, I think in 3 years it went away. It disappeared. So you could be in trouble as a child and it didn't follow you and it didn't haunt you and life was good. Now, this is serious stuff.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I see it time and time again where I'll have someone come into my office that we've represented back 5 years ago, and they're looking to join the military.
Right.
And they're prohibited from doing it because they got into a school fight and are charged with a battery when they were 14 years old.
Yeah, which is, and what a shame. And you don't, the stigma, the problems, it's crazy. Well, we're about out of time. Thank you so much. I know you've got work ahead of you for the program and tweaks to make, but it's a great thing. It's working. The recidivism's down. So thank you so much for your hard work.
Well, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Okay.